Do we have a motion for that?
Second.
Any discussion?
I would like to make one correction on page 6, second paragraph, second sentence. We need to add the word sold at the end of that sentence.
Okay.
So
Anything
then
else?
you would make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the motion passes. Public comment? Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi. My name is Nick Thomas. I reside at 705 Shore Drive, which is in the Silver Shores neighborhood on the beach side. I live on a canal. And I'm here simply to share with you all that I'm about 6 months into the process of trying to, I wouldn't say petition, but gently cajole the city to begin the process of trying to get septic or sewer into my neighborhood. I've had a number of interactions with Rob Bolton. It hasn't gone as quickly as I would have hoped, but he has been responsive. There's been some plans drawn up, and I've taken an informal poll of my neighbors, and there's generally a positive feeling about it. For those of you who aren't aware, Shore Drive, some years ago, had a resident who built to the property lines. Bello is the family name, and they were made to install a lift station, which is already on Shore Drive. And so, to the best of my knowledge, and I'm not an engineer, that would further facilitate the installation of sewer on my street. So, to my knowledge, the only thing that's standing in the way of going forward is political. In that, there was Mr. Bolton shared with me that there doesn't seem to be any sort of agreement with regard to waiver of the impact fee. Frankly, I don't care. It's about $2,000 from my understanding and payable over an extended period of time, so it's a negligible amount of money. I'm just here to ask that we move forward, and I'm obviously quite aware of the environmental impact or the adverse environmental impact. I just had my septic tank inspected and it passed, but my home is vintage 1962 or 1961, I believe. So it is in pre-83, I think is the standard. Anyway, I want what's good for the environment, and I want my future plans may include putting a second story on. So I just want to plan for the future and also protect the lagoon as much as possible. So I stand ready to answer any questions, but I suppose I'm here to just get the discussion started.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions? You've talked to Rob.
Many times.
Okay.
And I'll also add that I've been contacted by certain environmentalists who just want to, I guess, take my temperature with regard to my. I'm fairly well on the record of being pro-environment, pro-lagoon, and obviously I see the positives. I don't know that we need a study to prove that septic tanks are not the best possible scenario next to the river.
Chairman, Rob's here if you want.
Okay, thank you. Okay, but you've asked the. Well, Rob, why don't you come on up and talk about the process?
Hi, Nick and I have been in contact, and we've prepared a set of drawings and a cost estimate. We just revised that estimate again yesterday because we had some changes and some pricing didn't change much of the cost of what it would be per lot basis. We designed he's correct, Mr. Bello installed years ago a lift station at his property. The city paid for some upgrades so that it could be used as a city station in case some other residents along Shore Drive wanted to connect to sewer. I think that was back in 07 or so, and nobody at that time wanted to, but times have changed, and Mr. Thomas is in the process of doing some upgrades to his home, would like to get rid of the sewers, the septic system on his property. I presented a cost estimate two ways. One would be to install a gravity sewer in the middle of the road, and that would allow us to raise the road if there were some flood issues in that neighborhood. That cost was probably in the neighborhood of almost $20,000. The other was a design where it was alongside the road, crossing the road at property lines to make connections to the sewer system. That dropped the cost to roughly $14,000 or $13,000.
That's a per lot cost?
That's a per lot cost. In further discussions, as we were progressing through this, there came up some issues with the lagoon and some discussions, and there were some discussions that I've had internally with Mr. O'Connor and with other council members and with some of the utility commission members, and that is we have an impact fee that would be tacked onto that cost, and we had some general discussions. Is there a possibility of waiving that impact fee? That impact fee has never been calculated as a requirement for plant expansion. We've never looked at it as a revenue source because they're septic tanks. We don't know when anybody's going to be coming off of a septic tank and onto the city sewer system. So we plan our revenues just from the growth numbers that we see on new construction. Therefore, that would be a policy decision as to what the commission would like to see and what the city council would like to see as far as whether we would collect that impact fee off of people converting from septic tanks to sewer, or if there's a possibility of opening up a window for a waiver and therefore giving them the incentive from an environmental standpoint to connect early versus later connecting 10 years from now. I wouldn't recommend that you put a waiver on an impact fee and have it open-ended. I would hope that you would sunset it so that it gave the financial incentive to go ahead, abandon the septic system, connect to the sewer system, and maybe that window would be a year or 2 years, whatever the commission or councils felt appropriate. So the reason that I wanted to have this discussion today, and Mr. Thomas wanted to have this discussion today, was we're ready to send a letter out to the residents, and I would like to write in that letter whether that's something that we're discussing or something that we're not discussing, so that if I start getting phone calls from the residents, which most of the time in these assessment projects I do, I'm the one that takes all the phone calls, that I can talk on an intelligent level with them and not be just, well, I don't know what anybody's doing. If the Utility Commission decides that's a good thing, then I can say in the letter to them, the Utility Commission is recommending to City Council. We haven't gone to City Council yet. We don't plan on going to City Council anytime in the future, but it's ultimately going to be a City Council decision. And just so I can put something in the letter, whether I put something in or I don't put something in. So that's kind of why we're here today.
Okay. Now, aren't impact fees to pay for growth?
They're paid to expand plants for growth. And that was one of the reasons that impact fees came into fruition, was that people complained about raising their rates to do plant expansion that would allow for new growth. That's how impact fees were invented. Vero is a very old city. So they followed the old path, and we really have enough plant capacity to handle all the septic tanks within the city limits at our wastewater plant. So we don't need to collect impact fees for the growth. Now, the second thing that impact fees do is they're there to retire debt. So in a case of growth where there's plant capacity and somebody pays an impact fee, then the impact fee is used every year to pay down city debt principal. You can't pay interest, you can only pay the principal amount. And that's the practice that we've taken over the years. So go ahead.
Would be appropriate.
Yeah, a couple.
Go ahead.
The other concept to me in impact fees is to have money there to assist in line extensions or running of, in this case, a sewer line. So to me, it would be something I think has to be resolved. I would think that retiring, in this particular case, the impact fee would be the incentive or the assistance, because somebody's going to carry the freight for putting that line in the ground. And as I understand it, would be those individual residences. And I live around the corner too. So, I mean, like we were talking, I would have an interest as well. But I think that a whole package presentation, a whole plan here would be appropriate, because if one street does it, I think the concept would be that others might join in as well in this, and to have the answers would be appropriate.
Yeah, and you got to remember, an impact fee that we call an impact fee is strictly for the plant capacity and the force main network that's out there to a lift station. The lift station back to the gravity sewer system, back to the lots, has traditionally been paid for through an assessment program, because those items improve the value of the property. So if somebody called in and was doing an assessment on a piece of property, there's a certain value if you're on a septic system, there's a certain value if you're on a sewer system, and usually it's a higher value if you're connected to a publicly owned sewer system for that piece of property. So traditionally we've handled those, just like Jim has said with the reuse system. Any expansions that we do will either be done by the property owner themselves or through an assessment program as a group. For reuse lines extensions. So that's how we've handled sewer. That's how we've handled water line extensions, especially out in the western areas. We've done, since I've gotten here, I've probably done a dozen or almost 20 different assessment programs, and they've always been, the lot owner pays for it over time, and we kind of finance it. Now, from a expense standpoint, Jim and I have discussed, we only have a limited amount of funds, so some of these may need to be bonded or something else. And if it becomes a big program, we're going to have to rethink how we do, because a lot of times these were $100,000 to $200,000 projects. We had enough money in reserves. We would fund these projects through reserves and then collect back over a 10-year period. If you're going to go to a real large program, you may want to extend that out to a 20-year program. And in a lot of cases, when you go to a bond issue with a 20-year, instead of making quarterly payments, you make one annual payment on your non-ad valorem tax roll. So that's another avenue that we would want to explore as we start discussing this. So,
and to explore that would start with, or it's already in the works.
No, that starts here. So,
Rob, what you've described has been public policy up to this date, and what precedent is there for dealing with a situation like this? Has there been any before, and how is the city?
Not on the impact. I can tell you that I did 3 sewer projects. The first one was Gay Feather assessments. I've done a bunch of water, but typically people want water because their wives don't want orange hair from well water, and they don't necessarily worry about the sewer because once they flush and it disappears, they don't care where it goes. So I've done 3 sewer programs, though, and they were all right around the time of the hurricane. One was Gay Feather. It was a short street. At the time, we weren't collecting impact fees for city residents because of previous policies that were in place. They then later changed it to where every person that was connecting paid impact fees. So from the time that Gay Feather with no impact fees to the time that we did Hibiscus and Iris, they did collect impact fees, and on to Tulip, they did collect impact fees. So this would be something that we would, and just because you collected it from one group in the past doesn't mean that you cannot waive something in the future. And I would say that the majority of those individuals, there wasn't a whole lot of connections versus how many connections we have in total. But this would have to be something that you would want to look at and open it up for a window of time and then shut it type thing. As you do each street, Chuck, like you said, as you go through the area, you would do each.
Yeah. Well, the county's waiving all impact fees for the next 18 months. So there is precedent just to do that. And they're doing that to try to stimulate some more economic growth.
Well, they're discussing that.
No, they passed it.
I think that needs to be looked into. I'm not sure they've passed it.
Okay, well, that's not germane to our discussion.
Right.
And this is not a growth. This is, somebody's well-being and a well-being of the lagoon. I mean,
yeah,
I can understand.
And that's what's
Mr.
more
Thomas's
important.
frustrations, he wants to extend and build a footprint that's larger, and he's got a septic tank system in the way.
Now, is there any, what are the costs to the city to do this project?
If we got on impact fees, can we stay with impact fees for a minute?
Well, I haven't left really impact.
Oh.
Rob had said that.
We
collect the impact fees
We
too.
pass all the costs on to the resident. Now, the internal stuff up to this time, we've absorbed that. There isn't any agreement on an assessment, so my staff time, my time, any mail-outs that we do will all be on the cost to the customer. If it fails, we're out those expenses. If it passes, we really don't charge any of those expenses except for the postal costs to the assessment. Any advertisements or anything like that is all charged to the project itself. But my time and inspection times and stuff like that, we don't charge any of that time to the project.
I guess my question is specifically dealing with infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
We have the infrastructure to do this project.
We have the infrastructure with the lift station, and then it's just an expansion of the infrastructure to serve their homes,
Which would be paid by the assessment.
which would be paid through the assessment.
Okay, so
And what would be the rationale for waiving the impact fees? I don't know.
I have seen it. If you Google it and you look through other areas, I know they talked about it in Jacksonville. Olympia in Washington has done it. It comes. The rationale is, especially when you're surrounded by a water body, it's where we've had these discussions that the septic tanks could be polluting the lagoon. There's a benefit to all the customers on the utility system to get those septic tanks out of the ground and connected to a sewer system so that you benefit by having a healthier lagoon. That is how it's been approached, because originally when I looked at it, just being the engineer and being somebody that was involved in it, I was like, there's no way you could waive impact fees. But it's been done. And they've gone through that process and looked at it as it's a benefit to all the customers, and therefore their policymakers made that decision.
I think the rationale in this case would be that we have the capacity, we have the infrastructure other than up the street, the particular lines that would go up the street, which would be covered by the assessment. So I don't think we need the impact fees to help cover the cost of this project. So I would be in favor of helping the residents to do this by waiving the impact fees.
Okay, my understanding from way back when impact fees were implemented and they were challenged in the court system, the court system only approved impact fees because they paid for the impact each individual made on the system, okay, which would mean plant expansion, transmission line expansion, and it was deemed by the courts that's all you could charge them for. So there had to be a study to determine what that value was, okay? So it's truly their impact, okay? So if you then charge the client, the end user, for the expansion of the transmission line, then he's paying for his impact to the system. How can you, in good conscience or even legally, charge them when the impact fee when they're paying for the expansion itself? Now, you've heard today we don't need to expand the plant, so there is no impact in that regard. Now, if you say, well, the previous residents already paid for it, so they need to pay their fair share. Now, there is some logic to that because the plant was paid for in advance, and I guess that's how you get to the debt payment. Okay, so maybe that part they should pay because the plant was built prior to them, and they're paying their fair share of a plant that was already built large enough for them to tap into. But if you're going to charge them for the transmission line installation, I don't see how you can charge them their entire impact fee. So that's my take on it. To me, it's about being fair and following the intent of the law. Impact fees have always gotten underneath my skin a little bit because that's what ad valorem taxes, to my understanding, were to provide. This is a common service, but the intent was that the rate of growth exceeded the ability, I guess, to tax, or politicians found it easier to tax people that weren't here, is really what it was. So that's my take on it. I have a hard understanding if you're going to charge them for the installment of the line. So now let's go specifically. You said there was a lift station installed, but then you referenced a gravity line.
Yeah, in other words.
Okay, so you're only going, if there's a lift station, then it's a force main, whatever the size of it is. And
Now,
so wouldn't it pump back into the force main that's serving the plant? I'm confused about the gravity system.
When Mr. Bello came in, he wanted to put a private lift station in and run a force main down and tie into our force main network. We at the time discussed and worked with Mr. Bello and upsized that lift station so that it could be a city-maintained lift station and provide for additional growth along the people on Shore Drive. That's what was installed. We contributed some of the funds. He contributed some of the funds. There is a payback because he was a developer, so anybody on Shore Drive, there is a reimbursement to Mr. Bello and a reimbursement to the city for part of that lift station. From the lift station, then, you come out with gravity lines with manholes down the street and up the street along Shore Drive because it's down the bottom of the hill but not into the cul-de-sac. And those costs associated with the gravity sewer system and the reimbursement to the city and Mr. Bello is part of the assessment program. On top of that is what we were discussing on the impact fees. We would charge $2,290 for impact fees, which covers the major transmission mains, you know, the 16-inch or 15-inch or 14-inch lines that are out in A1A and other areas of the city that brings the collection from all the lift stations of the waste back to the sewer plant.
Which is in the form of a force main.
Which is in the form of a large force main, yes.
Right.
Rob, who would be paying?
Trunk line, if you want to call it a trunk line force main.
Rob, who would be paying to, I think you had talked about that perhaps the necessity of raising the level of the street. Is that a cost, or are there other costs here that will be borne by the city or could be borne by the city in the future?
The option to raise the street was an option to the residents because if we went down the center of the road, there would be extra fill, material, everything else. You then would destroy more or less the road base that was there. And very similar to what we did on Tulip, we mixed in place what was there, used that as a subgrade, and built the road up on top of it so that we raised the road. They did not experience the flooding situations that Tulip Drive did. So the residents on that street opted towards putting it on the side of the street between some power lines that are underground and the street itself. And they have a very wide right-of-way in that area. Install it in that area to save roughly, I think it was $4,000 difference per lot, or it was higher than that. $7,000 difference per lot. So they chose, hey, we're happy with our street, the elevation that's there. Still, as part of this whole project, because we will be open cutting every 100 feet, we will do an overlay over the street, which will be borne by them. And I don't remember exactly what the cost of that is. Probably $1,500 or something like that for the overlay portion of it. But that's built into the project cost. So at the end of the day, from where the sewer system starts all the way down around the cul-de-sac, you know, they'll have a gravity sewer system and an overlaid road. I don't think they want to live with open-cut, patched asphalt everywhere. It's just not going to be something that I think the residents are going to want.
Refresh my memory, which street is Shore?
If you want, I can pull it up and show you on a screen. But Shore Drive is off of Tradeswinds up by Bethel Creek area. If you go past the Bethel Creek house and keep going past the Village Market,
Yeah, I know
the
it's in that-
subdivisions that are
Right,
back in there.
I know
Shore
it's in
Drive is about the second or third down from the north,
Does it run east-west or north-south?
east-west, and then curves
so it comes
down
off
around.
of A1A.
Yeah.
Yes.
And is it the first one right by the Village Beach Market?
If I may, Toby,
It's the second or third.
Second or third?
I know exactly. So I'll tell you. There are three, back behind the Village Beach Market, there are three canals from the 60s, right? North, south, north, central, south. I am on the south canal on the north side of the street, okay? So I am the southernmost of those three canals, and I'm on the north side of that canal.
Got it. And,
Okay.
it goes from A1A to a cul-de-sac.
Well, it does, but there's a little jog in the road. So as you are traveling north, the second road past Bahamar is Shore, and then you take Shore to Tradewinds, which is the next road up west. And then it's a little jog, but
it
name-wise,
goes in.
Shore
I got it.
continues westward and then button hooks around. Yeah. So I'll just, may I indicate which one? Or
Yeah, go
is
ahead.
it-
It's
Well, I don't know
somewhere.
if this thing even,
Oh.
I don't think it's got a pencil, but,
Anyway, yeah, you have me.
well, hold on.
Oh.
So in this proposal, which lots are affected?
I'm going to defer to Rob. Well, as he's indicating, it's everybody along Shore Drive. And then, Rob, you could probably indicate where Mr. Bellows' lot is. And so that's where the lift station sits right now. And then show him mine is there. No, that one on the right. So it's a cozy little street down there, you know.
But is it all the way to A1A on the other side of Tradewinds also? Okay, so it's all those lots on either side.
No.
The only thing we're talking about is everything coming down the hill off of Tradesman.
Okay.
So even the properties in front Tradewinds, we're not included. Everybody-
Right, because
Rob.
I think they're already on. Like Jay Kramer's house is just there, and I think he's got
No.
sewer. He doesn't? Y'all don't have it on Tradewind?
Everything in red is septic tank.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize that. But instead of getting trying to get a agreement with all those folks, my understanding is, you know, at least we can start on Shore Drive.
Yeah, it's these two, everything from Tradewinds that's fronting along Shore Drive all the way down. So nothing on Tradewinds.
So Mr. Bella pumps all the way to A1A?
It pumps all the way, well, actually, it pumps all the way to the plant, but.
Oh, I get.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it
Yeah.
joins up
The
with the
tie-in
system.
actually was closer towards the Bethel Creek, the village market and everything over there as you go down there.
And while I'm standing, just let me reiterate, the impact fee, to me, is not a reason to delay the project, whatever you guys decide. What I stand here for today is wanting to get on with it.
Mr. Chairman, is this thing on now? I'm a little troubled in the sense that it appears that we're taking a case and it's somewhat of in a vacuum. And if you're going to begin to set public policy with this case, is that acceptable to the city, to the council? Is it the right thing? I think the objectives here are highly desirable. I don't think there's any question about that. But does
I
that
wasn't
mean
asking to
you-
set
you-
policy today, I was just asking to say whether we were discussing it or not discussing it. If it was the utility commission's opinion that they were just going to say, no, we're going to leave impact fees alone, then I can write my letter out tomorrow to the people along Shore Drive. If it's going to be something we're going to pursue this and discuss it further, then that's what's going to be in my letter.
Just for clarification, and you're right, Rock, we shouldn't be setting public policy because one case tying to the sewer. But I think what has happened because of the interest in the lagoon and the discussions of the stormwater runoff as well as the septic tanks, it's sort of gotten ourselves into a general discussion about how do we address the issues. It just so happened his case came up while that general discussion was going on. And I think that's what has happened is it's superimposed. What my recommendation would be is that we proceed with the letter, have it go out tomorrow, and say there is possibility of discussion on impact fees, but we plan it into our costs so everybody knows this is the up cost of that. If the Utility Commission wants a presentation, possibly at the next meeting, Rob can put together a presentation on impact fees and how it affects if we want to proceed with the lagoon. One of the important functions, and when this was first brought to me, I was very concerned about waiving impact fees. You know, if Joe Smith down the street paid an impact fee 6 months ago and then we waive it going forward, to me it's a fairness issue. in the city of Vero Beach, we don't really have too many of those impact fees that have been paid recently because we haven't had that much growth. So I think it is a subject and debatable if, in fact, we are trying to promote people connecting to the sewer. I think, as Mr. Thomas said, in the scheme of things, $2,000 when it's going to cost you $15,000 a lot is not a major factor to determine if you're going to connect to the sewer. And in many cases, a person on a septic tank, when they make a decision to tie onto the sewer, you can bet they're having some major issues with their septic system, and it's a cost-benefit analysis as to when they make that decision. But again, my recommendation is let's proceed with the letter going out and saying that, you know, there's a possibility of sometime before this project starts, but at the same time you need to count on impact fees being there. Make a presentation where you get a general understanding of where I think Rob is talking about on trying to encourage people to connect from the septic system to the from a septic system to a sewer system.
Well, and I think Nick has said he's willing to proceed on that basis. His neighborhood.
Thank you. And I did check with as many of my neighbors just on Shore Drive as I could wrangle. But let me tell you, straight up, that the appealing part of this deal is being able to pay it over time. Nobody wants to, write a check for the big number, but I'm willing to prorate it over a number of years. 20 would be better than 10.
Jim, is that our policy now?
Yes, sir. We have had we've put it over time. As Rob says, in some cases when they were large, we did a bond issue or a loan of some type, and then that was charged off to the residents as to the cost of that on an annual basis. And we've done it, and it can be done in two forms or fashion. One just becomes part of the utility bill, or the other is it's put on the ad valorem tax billing as part of that process to collect the money.
Which I favor because it's deductible.
I'm not a tax attorney, so.
I think what you're suggesting, Jim, is correct. This is a subject that's going to come back in far greater detail and a lot bigger than just Shore Drive in the not too distant future in front of us. Mm-hmm. We always have the option of revisiting. You could even issue a credit should we decide to make that part of a comprehensive plan for all those involved in the city who would be transferring off of a septic system. So I think you should go ahead with your letter. Do everything we can to, if Mr. Thomas and his neighbors are ready, we'll accommodate them, and as long as we're not doing anything that's going to affect the surrounding neighbors in the future.
I appreciate that, and we will do it. If we talk about impact fees, that window issue is a very, very critical part of that, to make sure that we have an open and close, and if we're going to use that as sort of a carrot to incentivize folks going to the sewer. But I think that's for a later discussion.
Well, I would, I agree totally that we should not waive impact fees just for this one little project, and I wasn't considering that at all. I would like to next month have Rob come back with a proposal, because I would like to incentivize getting these septic tanks onto the sewer system, and I think the waiving the impact fees is a good way to do that. And so Rob could come back, and perhaps we could start talking about a potential a policy in that direction, and we can look in greater detail at the actual cost that there would be to the city in terms of capacity and those things that impact fees traditionally pay for. So rather than just sitting back and doing this all off the cuff. But I would also encourage you to get the letter out tomorrow. We can't set policy today, obviously, but so work with Jim and the letter and make sure that we're comfortable with that.
Just as a disclaimer, I'm up in that area. I'm on a septic tank. I am not encouraging or discouraging the impact fee conversation. And Shore Drive is just about 2 streets down from me. So as Chuck, I'm sure, also would plead the same discussion. So,
well, I'm not. So
yeah,
and I would like to see you all get off your septic tanks. So let's move forward.
Well, I would recommend that there is a discussion and a policy be set as to how the city is going to handle these, because I agree you're going to see more of these based on the discussion that the community is currently having on the lagoon itself. I agree with Rock. It is a desirable end result. But I don't think government should, its policies change based on who's sitting here or sitting on city council as to what one individual may think ought to or should not happen. It should be discussed, and a fair and appropriate solution, even-handedly applied to everyone, should be discussed and we should come up with that. Now, I'm not saying, I don't even think Rob came here with that request, but I think this request dictates that discussion be moved forward. So I would recommend that we recommend to the city council that they move to that point, because I do believe we're going to see more of these, and I just would like to see government even-handedly disperse, so to speak. And obviously, I think it's a good thing also. But, in other words, if a community, are we going to push forward? Is it a good thing? And are we going to actively try and pursue it? Or are we going to say, if you bring it to us, if you can rally your community, in other words, an activist, an advocate brings it forward and moves it forward, then we address it. But all of that should be discussed, I believe, in a proper policy that's even-handedly applied, should be decided upon.
And I agree. It's got to be even-handedly, and it's got to have the goals and objectives that it's intended to. And again, that's why, Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that we have that presentation at the Utility Commission prior to taking it to the City Council, that we air what it is, what are the goals that we hope to achieve, what are we incentivizing, and how is it not punitive to a class of customer.
Jim, sorry.
I'd like to.
Jane, please.
I would like to speak on that as well, because I think to single out one area and say, okay, we're going to do this and move forward to get you off the lagoon. There are other people who are on septic tanks that are interested in the environment as well, who also might be interested in coming on board if they could get the impact fee waived as well. So I do think we need to discuss it over a larger picture than just one little small area, because it won't be fair to give them that and tell everybody else down the road, well, sorry, but that was just a special case to get them off of the septics because of the lagoon, because we're all feeding into the lagoon one way or the other. Mm-hmm. It's somewhere we all end up in that lagoon somehow. So I don't think you can point to that neighborhood being any more of an impact than anybody else's neighborhood in the area.
And it's like saying the island's impacting more than the mainland, which is accurate. If you have the septic tanks along the canals, they have the same bleeding factor that goes into the lagoon. Mm-hmm. So, Jane, I agree with you. I think we've got to sort of look at it in the scope and devise that policy as to what we're trying to encourage.
Jim, I have one final question that maybe you could bring back in the following discussion, but one of the things that's kicking around in the back of my mind is, are there any legal ramifications if, in fact, you adopt a new policy that waives impact fees? And you talked earlier about sort of the fairness doctrine, but does any person who's paid an impact fee for some similar work in the past have any legal recourse? I don't know the answer to that. And maybe it's a short answer, but at least I think as part of the discussion, we ought to understand whether or not there are any potential liabilities that would flow from this policy if we were to adopt the chairman's approach to this matter.
We can bring back that information, but the bottom line, local governments have the right to change and modify charges and billings, but it's got to be based, and it has to have the Fairness Act as to what is the goal, what are you trying to achieve in order to make it legal. But as pointed out, the county has been discussing in the waiving of impact fees, and before it's all said and done, they may take impact fees for roads and waive those, and not for sewer. You just never know how that will come out. But again, it's got to be, and we can't discriminate against classes. I can't waive the impact fees on the island and not waive the impact fees on the mainland, as an example.
Thank you.
two things. One, the intent wasn't just for Shore Drive on the impact fees we were discussing. It was for all. The other is a disclaimer, too. When I said I'll get the letter out tomorrow, that was a figment of speech, but I'll try to get it out by the end of this week, okay?
Tomorrow by 2. All right, Mark, did you have some comments?
Yes, I think I remember, as long as I've been standing there. Mark Mucher, 617 Indian Lilac Road. I had a comment on the impact fees and then also a question. And in the interest of full disclosure, I have a brand new drain field on my septic tank, and I'm on the island probably about as far from water as anybody else, as far as you can get. But on the impact fees, it's my understanding that impact fees are must be spent, if they're collected, in the future on expansion made necessary by the impact of the payor. In other words, if you don't have any plans for expansion, you shouldn't be collecting impact fees. And if you're talking about the pipe down the road and the lift stations and things like that, those would be part of an assessment, assuming there's going to be an assessment. I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that or not, but that's my understanding. I'm not a lawyer. Unfortunately, we don't have any lawyers in here except for the possible exception of Nick. And so I think that needs to be addressed. My question is that in everybody's favorite Mark Schumann blog site, there was an article up there that talked about this exact thing, and what it basically said, and I don't know whether the source was a city councilman or what the source was, but it basically said that what the city wanted to do was convert everybody to sewer off of septic, and not only was there a possibility that there would be no charge to do that, there may even pay an incentive to do that. I don't know how many minutes or hours after that article was up, or the blog was up, it disappeared. So I just wondered if anybody knew what the genesis of that was. Thank you.
You have more time on your hand than I do.
Okay. I guess that will close public comment. And we'll go on to our old business, seeing as we have no new business. So our power resources presentation.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and Commission members. Thomas, Director of Power Resources. At your last Utilities Commission meeting, you asked me to come back and talk with you a little bit about where we get our power from and kind of arrangements we have to get here, how we pay for it, and just kind of give you some background. I'm glad to do that today in a relatively brief presentation. Let's see if this works. Good. So just from a high level, our power sources generally are measured in megawatts, which is actually a unit of power, or megawatt hours per hour. If you integrate that power over an hour, all we're doing is serving the city's load, the retail load that we have here amongst our customers in the city. We don't have any wholesale customers. We're not selling to anybody else, so that the uses of our power are strictly here locally. And in addition, we need to have enough extra power to cover our losses. And the losses come about locally in our own transmission system here around town, and distribution system and transformers and so on. Those losses are generally used to heat up the wires and heat up the transformers that are lost and not sold. So there's always about a 5%, roughly 5% difference between what we sell to our customers and what we buy or generate. So that the difference is losses. In addition, since most of our power comes to us over FPL's integrated transmission system, they also have a loss factor that amounts to about 2 or 3 megawatts, depending on the hour, that we have to find a source of power for. So we basically generate our own losses. We, of course, would always have the option to not do that, and they would charge us for the losses. But we find it less expensive to generate our own losses, basically. The power sources are all managed by OUC, Orlando's Utilities Commission, under our contract with them. Supplemental power, and also a number of other services that they do provide, including scheduling. I'll show you a little bit about that in a minute. So here's a list of our sources and how big they are, and kind of listing from the top down. The FMPA St. Lucie project is 13 megawatts now. It's recently been upgraded from about 11. That is a project under which the city is contracted with FMPA to, and it's a take-or-pay contract, which basically is another term for it is a hell or high water contract. You're going to pay for that contract whether you take the power or not. That's for the life of the unit. That's actually power out of St. Lucie number 2. I'll talk in a minute a little bit more about that. You also are a contract party for FMPA Stanton project, which was the Stanton 1 number 1 unit, 20 megawatts. FMPA Stanton 2 project, unit 2, 17 megawatts, 16 and a half actually. And then the contract that took effect on January 1st, 2010, which is the Orlando's Utilities Commission, OUC, supplemental power, right now is 99 megawatts. In addition to all those sources that come from the outside, we have our own municipal power plant, which has a 155 megawatt capacity, at least in the wintertime, a little bit less in the summer. So if we add all those up, we get 304 megawatts of capacity. 103 of that is out of our own power plant, relatively old steam units. Another 52 megawatts out of our local power plant for our combined cycle unit, which is what I call middle-aged and kind of middle-of-the-road efficient. It does have the advantage of being able to start within 20 minutes or so. And just, I thought you might ask, in case you're wondering, unit number 1, obviously the units were put in order of numbers. Number 1 was the oldest one, it's 52 years old. Number 2, which is in combined cycle with 5, is 49 years old. Number 3 is 42 years old. Number 4 is 37 years old. You know, and people ask me, what's the lifetime of one of these units? You know, it's like a car. You can make it go forever if you want to. If you keep it in good condition, you don't abuse it too badly, you maintain it well, you replace parts when you need to replace things that are worn out. As they get older, they're harder to fix, harder to find parts for, harder to find people to work on them, more expensive. And the other thing that's missing as you go through time is you don't gain the advantages of having something that's newer, technologically more efficient and easier to use. So they're still, even though they're there, they're older and they're not, have a number of disadvantages. So all those resources need to match up to our load. We talked a little bit about our winter, and our winter peak is forecasted to be about 164 megawatts this winter. The all-time record is 210 in 2010, January 11th, 2010. Summer peaks are a little bit less, so our winter peaking utility here still. Summer peaks forecasted for about 158. That's based on normal weather. And actually, our record for the summer is 167, which took place in 2005, August 16th. Okay. So when we look to match the sources and the loads, the power supply and the loads, we have a repeating a supply of 304. Our loads we're trying to aim for 164 and 158 this year, winter and summer, plus about 3 megawatts in transmission losses we need to find. So if we do the calculation, we have a planning reserve of about 88% in the summer and 82% in the winter. The Florida Reliability Coordinating Council, which is an organization that we belong to for reliability, and it's not optional. We have to meet their requirements. One of the requirements is that each utility, and we are operating as an independent utility still, has to have at least a 15% planning reserve, which we have way sufficient, way more than we need right now. Questions so far? I don't want to bore you with this too much. Let's look a little bit at some of these sources. They've been around a while, they get talked about a lot. First one on the list is the St. Lucie Nuclear Project. this, by way, all these projects at FMPA are set up the same way. FMPA was set up to take advantage of advantages of scale and allow the smaller utilities to have some cost advantages that come with large-scale units. And what happened with FMPA is they negotiated to purchase a portion of the St. Lucie nuclear plant from FPL as they were designing and building it, Unit 2. And the way FMPA does that is, they'll actually get title to the unit. They'll float a bond issue and borrow all the money necessary to make that purchase, which is very expensive. I'm sure I don't have the number, but it's very expensive. And the way those contracts then are held up is each city that wanted to subscribe signs this take-or-pay contract for the unit. And actually, you sign two contracts. You sign one that said you'll take the power supply, and you sign another one that says even if there's no power supply, you'll still support the project until the bonds are paid off. So they're very stringent contracts. There's something a little bit unusual about the St. Lucie arrangement. There's a reliability exchange agreement for the same amount of power. They took 50% of the power that they're entitled to for Unit 2 and traded it for the same amount of power out of Unit 1. That agreement is just a paper agreement, but what it amounts to is these units do come down periodically for refueling for extended periods of time, and I think the group at the time they did the agreement decided that they wanted to have at least some power coming in during that month when the unit was off. So for all intents and purposes, we're taking half of the power we're entitled to. Half of our 13 megawatts comes out of Unit 2, half of it comes out of Unit 1. Also, something a little unusual with the nuclear units is almost all the costs are fixed, and they're pretty much all known in advance. So FMPA sets up their budget based on what they hear from FPL about what the project operating and maintenance costs are going to be, what capital needs they might have, and the other big need is fuel. Because the fuel is a little different, it's actually capitalized as it's mined and refined, and the manufactured of the fuel elements and fuel assemblies over a 3 or 4 year period as they're assembled, they're capitalized. And when they're inserted in the plant and they are used over about a 3 year period, they're depreciated over their life. So all of the costs that come, even the fuel, is depreciation and expenses. It's a little different kind of an approach. Right now, this is a pretty good source of power for us. The current all-in costs are $67 a megawatt hour. That's a recent cost. This is one of those units that if it's available and it's running, we take the power. Comes to the meter first. I was asked about outages on this unit, and I do have schedules of the upcoming refueling outages that are scheduled. And I actually found it a little bit difficult to go back and find a track record of the past outages. I'll ask that question, but I don't have the answer yet. Just for curiosity, the next outage will be coming in September 30 for 30 days, Unit 1. Then there's a refueling outage for Unit 2 in March that runs until April 4th. So these are all about 30-day outages now, so they turn around the fuel. They typically take a third of the fuel out. They move all the used fuel toward the center and put the new fuel around the outside to try to keep the radiation and the power density approximately even. And if you want to know what happens to the spent fuel, we can have a different discussion about that.
Can I ask a question? I hate to be ignorant,
Sure,
but
absolutely.
what is the fuel for nuclear power plants?
It's uranium oxide. It's enriched uranium oxide.
Okay. And where does one purchase that?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know where FPL gets theirs. It would be typically, uranium would be a Western mining operation. It's naturally occurring in the ground. About 0.7% is the radioactive isotope. It goes to an enriching process, which used to be done all by the government in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I don't know if they still do it all there. They enrich it to about 3% of the radioactive isotope. They manufacture it into a ceramic pellet. The pellets are inserted in a big, long stainless steel tube. Tubes are assembled together in a bundle. So that's a fuel bundle. They're usually long, 30, 40 feet long. And the tubes are about that big around, an inch maybe. And So
And they have
once-
an approximately a 3-year life. Is that what?
They have about a 3-year life when they finally use them. Yeah, when they get them in a reactor and start the reaction going. At that point, after about 3 years, a good part of the radioactive isotope is used up, and also the radiation process changes some of the other elements and it makes it less efficient. So it starts to lose its heating value.
Thank you.
Sure. FMPA Stanton now is used to be an all coal plant, but now the OUC folks have modified both of these units to burn a fair amount of gas, either coal-fired with coal or actually burn gas alone. So that's helped in the dispatch because, as you're probably well aware, the price of gas has been below the price of coal on a million BTU basis for the last couple of years. And that's made these units not be in the economic dispatch. And they were designed as baseload units, so it's pretty hard to manage them. It's again a take-or-pay contract you have with FMPA. This unit, Stanton number 1, has just come back from about a 7-month outage. They've installed selective catalytic reduction for NOx control, so that will help meet the new air pollution standards. And that unit now has come back online as of June 1st and it's going through kind of a shakedown cruise, but it's pretty much available to run. The variable costs for this unit are around $50 a megawatt hour, plus our fixed cost on a monthly basis for our share is about $400,000. The last time this unit ran for a whole month was October. The all-in cost was about $86 in October. So that's just about on our average these days. I think our average is around $84, $86. Okay. Unit 2 is very similar to Unit 1, except Unit 2 had the selective catalytic reduction SCR unit was installed when it was built. This one was built in, I don't remember, early 80s. The variable costs here are just a little bit less, $47 a megawatt hour. Our fixed costs are a little bit less, $375,000 a month. One reason for that is we have less power coming out of this. We only have 16 megawatts out of this one, so it's about the same fixed cost on them if you compare the sizes. This unit has been running, so in April, all-in cost, and they run most of the month, $93.20. There's a little bit of cycling with these units going on where they try to turn them down a little bit at night because sometimes the night loads are obviously less and they're trying to keep all these units online. So they're a little bit less efficient at night. But it's a better alternative than taking them offline. The final source that's external for us here is the OUC supplemental power. It's a calculation done once a year with under our contract where they'll supply enough power to meet our 15% planning reserve, taking into account our Unit 5 and 2 and our forecasted load. So if we go through that little calculation I showed you earlier, figure out how much power we need to get our 15% planning reserves, we'll count our combined cycle unit. They then contract for the rest. So this year that's 99 megawatts. By the way, that's at 6 megawatts less than the year before because our loads have gone down instead of gone up. And I also want to mention that OUC does provide a number of other services, scheduling, power factor, transmission services, and so on. Our variable costs under that contract are about $45 per megawatt hour, right in that neighborhood. A little bit some higher than that, some months a little bit lower than others. In addition, there is a fixed charge, and it's a little over $1 million. You and I talked about it. Its fixed costs are about $1.2 million a month. So, for example, our all-in cost for OUC for that particular source in April was $75. Well, that's fixed and variable.
Was what?
75. So, and we don't really actually do much with our own plant. We do run occasionally, but we don't actually budget any fuel or expense or whatever. But recognize again that when we run our plant, that's power we're not getting from OUC. So we're not paying for it twice. when we do it, we use it. One of the things that OUC does for us is they provide a 5 business days ahead planned dispatch or planned power schedule hourly. So there's 24 hours times 5 days, and it's of course scheduled every day. All of our power is delivered over the FPL transmission system because that's who we're connected to.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
that pertains to the previous slide?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that 15% planning reserve, that appears that it's a requirement to make sure we have adequate power. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's a kind of that's a requirement that's placed on all the utilities to make sure they all have adequate power and some adequate reserves in case they lose a unit, and so that because we're all interconnected, no utility leans on the other utilities more than is fair. It's a kind of a fairness thing.
So am I to understand from that previous slide that we actually pay for that 15%, even though we may not take it, because we're contracting with OUC for it?
That is correct. Their power supply at 99, get this calculation in our head, we're getting about 50 from FMPA. We got about 150 in our plant, but we take off the steam units, so we only have 50 in our plant. So there's another 100. They're selling us 99, so for all intents and purposes, our from a calculation from the OUC contract standpoint, we're covering about 200 megawatts. So that's our peak plus 15% that we're looking for.
Okay, but where I was going to go next, that's just in case we have to have it. In other words, if you're going to get in the business, they're going to make sure you have enough power, and like you said, don't lean on the others.
Right, correct.
But you showed us our plant can produce 155 megawatts.
Correct.
So why wouldn't we let our plant serve to handle that 15% planning reserve versus purchasing it?
Well, that's a question you probably should ask the previous city council. I don't know. That negotiation took place in 07 to 09 time frame, and other than the fact that the units were old and probably not very reliable, I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to depend on those for reserve requirements.
The incremental costs aren't justified. You pay your 15% at a lower price than you could produce it here for.
But it's only if we need it. And by entering into it with OUC, you guarantee to pay for it. And if the way I interpret that is if our demand exceeds it, we have to show the capacity to provide 15% more. And if you can provide it with your plant, you only pay for it when you provide it. How many times have we actually had to provide it? I mean, I understand what you just said. It's a contractual issue, so it's, so to speak, a debt issue. I was just curious.
I'm not sure what the thought process was in developing that contract. My guess is that people felt that those older steam units were so reliable. Remember, you were entering into a 20-year contract that those units would not be available for the 20-year period to use, even in any form or shape.
Okay, then what I'm hearing you tell me, in reality, we don't have 155 megawatt capacity then.
Well, it's there, and it's on the nameplates. If you ask us to start the units today, I think we could start them up and run them, but how long will they run and how reliably will they start is always a question.
Earlier, you said that we had planning reserves of 88% and 82% for summer and winter, respectively. If you backed out our steam units, do you know what our reserve capacity would be?
It should be 15% based on this calculation.
Okay. So with our 52 megawatt combined cycle unit plus the contract, we are at the 15%.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So does that sort of...
Yeah, but if we don't need it, that sounds to me like we're paying for it. We're buying it, but we're not selling it.
I agree.
And so that's really what was the basis of my curiosity.
It is one of the reasons that our costs are high.
One of the questions that I have for you, Tom, is if you were to take our fixed cost for maintaining the power plant, which, as we know, rarely runs, although I think the last the day of our last meeting, what was actually running.
Yeah.
And you were to divide that by our budgeted megawatts for the year, what would our burden be? What are we adding for cost per megawatt hour approximately?
Well, that's a good question. And we actually don't budget. When you look at this year's budget and our upcoming budget, we will have no budget in there for generation at local.
No,
at the
that's
local
not,
level.
we know approximately how many megawatts we're going to sell.
Right.
And if we would take the number of megawatts we're going to sell by the budgeted cost of the plant, I think the power.
I see what you're saying.
So we have fixed cost.
Absolutely.
To maintain the plant, and I'm sort of curious as what that would add to the 86 from the Stanton or the 67. What are our costs approximately per megawatt hour just to keep the plant here ready to go?
Okay, that's a good question. Let me go back, and it's going to depend on what year you look at if you put in the capital expenses.
Well, let's look at this year.
What's our budget this year? I think it's about $4 million operating, and then there's capital on top of that. We spent.
I mean, just look at operating. We can just look at operating. Well, that's
Well,
something you can come back.
Yeah.
Get back to us with.
It's a big number.
Yeah, I'll get back to
If
you
it's
on that.
if it's $4 million, the first megawatt costs you $4 million. Second megawatt costs you $2 million.
Well, that's $4 million out of the $90 million that we charge our customers.
Yeah.
Basically.
It's a huge number.
Yeah. Would we save any money if we decommissioned in terms of our plant operation, if we decommissioned 1, 3, and 4?
It's my suggestion that the city manager and FPL have agreed to is that we look at a retirement date for the plant, that should the FPL deal not go forth for some reason, rather than thinking that the plant's going to operate forever, we should set a retirement date for it within 5 years. A reasonable date gives us some chance to settle our purchase power agreements, whatever else we want to do. But meanwhile, we're kind of waiting to see how the FPL deal rolls out. But the longer we wait, the more it costs us to wait.
Would you go over that again? That recommendation that you would be making in the event there is any problems with closing the FPL deal?
I have suggested for budgeting purposes that we stop spending money on capital for the plant and that we set a retirement date sometime in the next 4 or 5 years, regardless of whether the FPL deal goes through or not.
Aren't we required by the OUC contract to maintain those units to a proper level of industry standard?
2 and 5.
Well, 2 and 5, and that item would be negotiable. They're not going to force us to keep the plant open if we feel it's not important, or it's not a requirement, or it's not efficient for us to do so. That would require a renegotiation of the OUC contract, purchase of additional power from somebody, either OUC or somebody else, to supply our loads. So going forward in the future, if without the FPL deal, you would be basically a distribution utility where you buy all your power wholesale.
Just for informational purposes, Tom and I have devised a revised capital plan in which we took the units 1, 3, and 4 out of capital investments going forward. We've gotten that approved through FP&L because maintaining the industry standards. But units 2 and 5 are the ones that were obligated with OUC, so we have to maintain that. And so we'll have to wait and see and make sure how the FP&L deal is going. But at the conclusion of that, if it should fail for some reason, then I think we would take another view of the units 2 and 5. We would still need transmission improvements on the FP&L system since we are transmission dependent upon their delivery. So we would be negotiating with OUC at the same time, probably with FP&L.
Shall I move on, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
All right.
Move on.
Just to kind of winding up here, how does the power actually get to us? I did mention it as a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation to schedule the power. OUC does that schedule for us. It's delivered here over the FPL transmission system. And I know this is a lot to look at, but we get these plans every day by email, and they're sent to FPL to let them know approximately what kind of burden we're going to be on the transmission system. That's a requirement of the contract with FPL, the transmission contract. So there's this sheet, and you probably can see it on your screen easier. It just shows the 24 hours down the left side, and the column HE is hour ending. It shows the forecasted load for Vero each hour. So you can see on May 23rd, if you look down at 5 o'clock in the afternoon is our peak forecasted. So what we need to do, the key there is we need to get 120 megawatts to Vero Beach, plus another 2 for FPL losses. So we need to find 131 resources. And on that day, St. Lucie was running at 13. Only one of the Stanton units is running Stanton 2, so we're getting 17 from Stanton, reading across that hour. That particular day, OEC was able to purchase 40 megawatts of firm power from us from Summit Electric Co-op for 8 or 10 hours there. That shows under other schedules. That was less expensive than running our own generation. So you see the Vero generation is zeros all the way for that day. The OUC power purchase agreement, OUC PPA, their column shows the amount of power they schedule to deliver each hour to make up our load after taking everything else into account. They also look for some secondary sources, which might be less expensive than their own sources to deliver to us, and there are some hours in the middle of the night when they're able to schedule some power from PFE, which is the FMPP power pool, FMPA East. That's the source, and it actually probably comes out of their Treasure Coast plant. So and the next day, just to show you how different it looks the next day, approximately the same loads. Their peak this day shows up at the hour ending 4 o'clock, or the hour between 3 and 4 o'clock, at 131 megawatts, plus we need 2 megawatts for losses. So we have a little bit more load to serve that day. And there they called for our generation to run. So this was scheduled to run that day to make sure that we had enough during those hours. They don't want to get so close that they're delivering 99 from their power purchase agreement and they need 100 because they don't have the transmission for it without it prearranging it. So it's much less expensive to prearrange it. So that's what we did that day. That kind of gives you an idea of what happens from their viewpoint. And that kind of ran me out of interest and issues here. I know one of the things I just brought along as an interesting item from last month, we were concerned about whether our sales were going and whether we're going to make our budget and that sort of thing. I noticed that under my report that I received from customer service for the month of May, that the kilowatt hour sales, so this is to our customers, is up 8% from the same month a year ago. So kilowatt hours, the energy sales are up 8%. That's good. Better news than April. Questions?
I have one question, Tom. The number 5, the combined cycle unit, when we refer to its ability to start up quickly, okay, the second half of the unit isn't it a nominal 900 water tube boiler?
There's a heat recovery steam generator at the tail end, the back end of that, and it does take about 2 hours to get that up, an hour and a half to 2 hours to get that up, so it gets steam up for the number 2 unit. But the number 5 unit can start in about 20 minutes and be online.
So you just vent the heat until the water tube side of the unit is up to operating conditions?
There's a kind of a carefully controlled heating of the unit, but they can heat relatively quickly. It's made to cycle and to heat quickly, so it'll heat up from cold to hot within 2 hours and produce steam.
So its full capability, it takes several hours?
Yeah, just 2.
Just 2?
Just 2 for that one.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, I'd like to maybe take a little 5-minute recess.
Are you finished with Tom?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
He does have a real job.
Thank you.